Thanks everybody for sharing. I think we should start with a prayer, and I'm going to be brave, and it's a little bit political, but it's a neutral prayer. I thought it was appropriate, though, for Election Day. We ask the Lord to give us the wisdom as we cast, and I know many of you have already casted your ballots already, and pray as Solomon did in Kings 3:9, for understanding that I may discern between good and evil, and vote for that person who is best at governing his people according to God's will. Amen. So I discovered pretty quickly when I was doing my research on the difference between the Catholic Church and the Presbyterian Church that you could easily do a whole session on either one of those religions. There's a lot of material. Luckily, there's more similarities than differences, but in any case, both of them are rich in history and both have different ways of governing and the way people worship in both churches, although pretty similar, also has differences. To be very honest with all of you, I was a Roman Catholic and raised Roman Catholic from the time I was born. I decided 5 years ago to become a Presbyterian, and we could spend the whole hour talking about why I made that decision to switch from the Catholic Church to the Presbyterian Church. But that's more of a personal thing. And really what I wanted to do today was just really get everybody to have some understanding of what each religion is really all about. The Catholic Church, again, because I was raised in it, I probably know more about it. But the Catholic Church really has its roots going way back. It is an ancient religion in that it does go back to the time of Jesus. If you remember, Jesus says to Peter, "Upon your rock I will build my church." And we also had St. Paul at that time, who was very much a notorious character. He was violent. It was reported that he killed several people, and yet he has this great conversion on the road to Damascus, where the great light shows and Paul is thrown to the ground. And Jesus says to Paul, "Why have you been persecuting me all these years?" So you got two very kind of different people as apostles of Jesus, and Peter and Paul. And indeed, for those of you who lived in Philadelphia your whole lives, there's a cathedral in Philadelphia called Peter and Paul. And so the Catholic Church really does believe it goes back to those early roots of those apostles. And as you know, in the Catholic Church, there are a lot of saints. Not only saints, but martyrs. And the saints are there for almost every kind of problem you can have or anything you're searching for. So with St. Anthony, we believe if you pray to him, you can find lost objects. If you're like Thomas and you doubt things and you need to put your fingers into the wounds of Jesus to believe he really exists, we have him as your patron saint. So the Catholic Church is full of saints, and they're basically people that you can model yourself after, go to for aid or help, ask questions to, and hopefully get help in response. But, we talk about the Holy Communion of Saints in the church. We're talking about not the regular congregation as much as we're talking about people who did special things and were martyred, in the name of Jesus. The church actual governance, let me say this, in the very early days, Catholic Church was made up of individuals who believed Jesus was Messiah, the Christ, and they would gather secretly in their homes, and they had a symbol of the fish, which would kind of announce when the next meeting was going to be. But they were very cautious about meeting, afraid they would be either destroyed by different sects of Judaism or by the Romans or whoever else was around that didn't like Catholics. So for a long time, it was an underground church. It met in people's homes. It met in caves. It met wherever they thought it was safe to get together. Interestingly, jump forward to the 20th and 21st century, and there's a church near Media called St. Thomas the Apostle. And that church, I learned just a few years ago, was started in a home of some farmers right near where the church is today located. And they met in the living room, and the priest would ride a horse out of Philadelphia to come do the service in their home. So Catholics have this long tradition of meeting wherever kind of the Spirit calls them. And very often it will be in people's homes. It will be somewhat secretive or underground, whatever word you prefer. And now, of course, in modern times, the church is very visible, very big cathedrals. You got Vatican City. The church is extremely well known. I'm sure there's some detractors from it. But it's been around a long time. I mean, it's been around literally since the beginning of the times of Jesus. And if you go back and look at where they started doing their governance, the first thing they did was, the Council of Nicaea, which was in the 300s. And that council got together and came up with the whole idea and depth discussions about the Holy Trinity. The Holy Trinity being the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and how those three entities related to each other and what it really meant, each part of that Trinity, what the role of the Father was, the role of the Son, and the role of the Holy Spirit. But this was worked out, in these different sort of councils that popped up. Later on in the 1500s, there was a Council of Trent, where Catholics got together, the leadership did anyway, and really was a response to the Reformation and Martin Luther, and saying, okay, Martin Luther's made some really good points. We've got to decide on how we're going to do things going forward and how we're going to worship. So there was a lot then about the Mass and how the Mass should be celebrated. And believe it or not, going back all that time, they decided then that the Masses should be in Latin, because a lot of people at the time understood Latin. It had Roman roots, which the church has, and they just felt it was the best way to go. And then later on in more modern times, instead of these councils of Nicaea or Trent, they started having what they called Vatican Councils. And that's where, the cardinals and the Pope would get together and they talk about different issues in the church. And the first Vatican Council was as recent as 1969, where Pope John the 23rd actually tried to liberalize the church and decided that Masses didn't have to be in Latin anymore. They could be in English, and basically tried to open the church up to be more inclusive, and also tried to get more of a role of laity people, normal people, to take a role in church and have jobs and responsibilities as well. Then there was a second Vatican Council, and that's where they really decided to get rid of the Latin Mass and a lot of the Latin roots and go to English. So the church has met over periods of time, and I'll talk about it when I get to the Presbyterians. You guys start much later in the 1500s. But again, you've gotten together for different synods and different kinds of meetings to iron out issues that were apparent in your church. Getting into some of the real orthodoxy or teachings of the Catholic Church are kind of interesting, because Catholics really do believe that there's an order and design to the world, that men and women are not there by simply chance. They were meant to be helpful in propagating the faith. They believe that, and this is one of the big differences between Protestantism and Catholicism, Catholics really believe that when you take communion in the Catholic Church, You literally are taking in the body and blood of Jesus Christ. Whereas in the Protestant sects, communion is looked at as much more symbolic. God may be present, but you don't have the idea that you're actually internalizing him. In the Catholic Church, this is a very important concept because they believe because Jesus really does enter you, that you can talk to Jesus within yourself. You, of course, can go to a priest. You, of course, can go to bishops or whatever. But Catholics really believe that if you take communion and you're really linked to Jesus himself, that you can have a direct relationship that way. Although the church has a great historical tradition of using priests to go to for confession, for masses. They are, in fact, an intermediary in a lot of ways between you and Jesus, except when it comes to communion. Communion is the one place in the church where they really do believe that Jesus is within you. And if you listen to your own heart and your own soul, you won't stray too far. There used to be an expression, give us a Catholic child to the age of 6 and you have a Catholic for life. That doesn't happen anymore. I have a daughter who's very non-religious and doesn't believe in God. And, she's much more of a liberal character, I would say. And yet she went through Catholic school most of her life. So, Catholic youth have rebelled to some degree. They don't have as many activities. One of the great things in the Presbyterian Church is you've got all these different things, you do water, you do Honduras, you do all these really great things. Unfortunately, the Catholic Church does not have that. There's a little bit of it, but nowhere near as much as Presbyterians do. And I'll explain when I get over to the Presbyterian Church why you're more involved in the world in a lot of ways than Catholics are. So the other thing Catholics believe is that the devil is absolutely real, that evil is really in the world because of the devil. And it's a constant struggle between good and evil. And in the Catholic Church, he's not just a symbol, he's real. And they believe it's always a constant battle because of the devil being in the world between the forces of good and the forces of evil. Now, one of the things that Catholics have believed for a long time, and it's been a little bit of hard thing for them to describe, is this thing about the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And in the days when I was in Catholic school, they tried to get us to understand the idea by using, a piece of clover with 3 leaves on it. And they said, see, it's all one stalk, but there's 3 different leaves, and one's the Father, one's the Son, and one's the Holy Spirit. And it sufficed, when you were a young kid to kind of think of it that way. Much more Catholic theologians are now moving towards the idea that they really are one. There's been an argument made that one of the reasons why God did not interfere with the crucifixion of Jesus was that God himself was being crucified at the same time Jesus was, and so was the Holy Spirit. So there's this movement in the Catholic Church to this idea that they literally are one entity, and they can't, in history anyway, influence one over the other because they're there at all times. And some Catholics believe that history is God actually in the process of actualizing himself. That as he moves and grows and changes, so does the world. So do his people. And that ultimately, we're moving towards him coming back and there being a new kingdom on earth. We have to unfortunately go through trials and tribulations and all those sorts of things before we get there. But the idea is ultimately we will get there. So there's that whole thing. Then, of course, as you know, we really do believe in the virgin birth, that Mary was in fact a virgin, that, she was told by the angel Gabriel that she would give birth to Jesus. And as you know, Mary's response is, "How could that be? I don't know man," meaning she had never had sex with a man. And Catholics believe that God, in fact, impregnated her so that his son could be born into the world. And that whole idea of being born into the world with Jesus, stems from this idea in the Catholic Church that the Son would be human and divine both. He would come into the world to both correct some of the traditions and some of the teachings of Judaism, and correct them, as Jesus says, "I don't come to replace the law, but to fulfill the law." And we could discuss, in great depth what that really means. But the idea anyway for Catholics is that he had to come into the world and be human and divine both to show us there was a better way to live. There was a better way to interpret the Torah and traditional Jewish texts. And he was, in fact, the New Testament is a correction on the Old Testament. It's no longer an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but it's more like you turn the other cheek. Forgiveness and all those sorts of things. We also believe he died in the Apostles' Creed, which you also read and believe, and that he literally did go to hell for 3 days, that he went to hell to deal with the souls that were there. Whether he took others up to heaven with him, I don't think we're really sure about, but we are sure there's a hell. So the Catholics do believe there's definitely a devil, there's definitely a hell, and as you know, in the Catholic Church, you have 3 levels of sins. You have original sin, which you were born with because of Adam and Eve and their disobedience in the Garden of Eden. And that has to be removed, Catholics believe, through baptism, that original sin. There used to be a time where if you died as a Catholic baby and you weren't baptized, that you went to this sort of in-between place between heaven and hell, and you got out of there after a certain amount of time and got to heaven. And it's similar, with our ideas about purgatory, but there was a special place, which I can't remember the name of babies who died before they were baptized and still had original sin on themselves. Then we believe there's venial sins, which are serious offenses against God, and they have to be forgiven. And again, Catholics believe that you have to go to confession through a priest, that you can't go directly to God for forgiveness. You've got to go through a priest. I think someday that'll change like it does in the Protestant church. We don't need priests to do your bidding for you, so to speak. But by grace and faith alone, you can be saved. But the church isn't quite there yet. So still, you're supposed to go to confession at least once a year and hopefully twice a year. And there are Catholics who go every week. And as you know, because there are masses every day in the Catholic Church, and there's communion every day in the Catholic Church, that some people have been known to go to confession daily. But anyway, it takes a priest for you to go through to God to get relieved of your sins. And beyond venial sins is the worst of mortal sins, which Catholics believe if you die with a mortal sin on your soul, and mortal sins would be something really grievous, like killing somebody for no reason or doing something really outrageous, like killing 6 million people. That you're not going to get to heaven unless that mortal sin is forgiven, again through a priest, again through you being really changed, your heart being changed. And if you're not really forgiven and you're not really soulful about asking for forgiveness, you'll stay in hell. So Catholics are a lot more rigid and a lot more black and white, I would say, than certainly Protestants are. We also believe in the Catholic Church that at the end of the world, God will come again to judge the living and the dead, that some people who've been dead and maybe in hell or purgatory will be brought back then to heaven. I think you lost me there. I accidentally hit a button on my computer, which is not a good thing to do. But I'm back. um, so, it's interesting too, because we have a lot of prayers in the Catholic Church. And some of the Protestant sects have adopted some of them, like the Our Father, and there may even be some Protestant sects that even do the Hail Mary. Certainly the Apostle Creed's pretty universal for Christian churches. But when we say, I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, Protestants think of Catholic with a small c, the idea of it being an open liberal church. Roman Catholics think of it with a capital C, that it's the Roman Catholic Church. So even when we say the same prayers, the words can mean different things in different sects and different religions. The study of the Bible is an interesting thing in the Catholic Church. And I've heard this many times at Westminster in different classes. And that is that, at least a lot of Protestants think, Catholics are taught that they're not smart enough to interpret the Bible, that they need a priest or a bishop to interpret it for them. There certainly may have been a time when people were told, don't read the Bible because it can be confusing and mix you up. And then you'll need a priest to really unravel the confusion that you have and the misunderstandings you have. But I can honestly say that when I was in Catholic school, and later on when I went to a Catholic seminary, not to become a priest, by the way, but just to understand religion better. I did get a master's in religious studies from the Catholic seminary. We were told to read the Bible. And the two big Bibles in the Catholic Church are the Jerusalem Bible and the New something Bible. I've got it written down here. But those are the two Bibles the Catholics generally rely on. Protestants have, a much bigger range of Bibles, going back to St. James Bible and other Bibles that we tend to use. I know the Presbyterians also at one time followed the Heidelberg Bible as well. So the Catholics don't have too many versions of the Bible. They basically have two or three. Protestants tend to have a lot more. But we believe that the Bible is literally to be taken, that it's really the Word of God and Jesus, and it's not to be messed around with or reinterpreted or whatever. There's much more of a belief that what is there in print is what is meant. And so there's a whole literalness about the role of the Bible in the Catholic Church. And those stories that you hear, whether it's Daniel in the fiery furnace or miracles that take place, Catholics believe literally that that's the case. Now, when I was in the seminary, I had a woman who was a great theologian from Belgium, and she was playing around more with the ideas that you could explain a lot of miracles in the Bible through science. And she took the position that, the reason why the Israelis were able to get across the Red Sea and away from Pharaoh was the Red Sea was at extremely low tide for a variety of reasons in terms of the alignment of the planets and other things. And so once that alignment started to shift, the water came back, and as we believe, the chariots of Pharaoh were drowned. She also talked about the man in the desert as being bird shit, pigeon shit, that for 40 years while the Jews were wandering through the desert, that they ate whatever the hell they could, including, bird shit that fell. So the interesting thing was, here's a Catholic seminary. I think people think Catholics are really rigid, but here is a woman who they considered a great theologian who explained a lot of things through science. And you would have thought she would have been excommunicated or something. But in the seminary, they want priests to be exposed to all points of view. And so they had people like her and then they had more literalists, they had more conservatives, they had more Orthodox. I mean, in every religion, pretty much, there's an Orthodox, there's kind of a conservative, and then there's kind of a more liberal group. Certainly it's true with Jews too. They have Orthodox, conservatives, and Reform. And in the Catholic Church, you can find those three kinds of species too. People who are totally literal by the Bible and the church teachings, another group that's kind of in between, and then a more literal, a more Reformed group that'll think, there's ways to explain these miracles by science. So I think one of the things I want to get across is Catholics aren't as uniform as you maybe think they are. And a lot of Catholics believe it's their right to believe as much Orthodoxy or as much Reformism as they choose to believe. Of course, our governance structure is much more rigid in the sense that you have priests, then you have bishops, then you have cardinals, then you got the Pope. And there's that whole kind of lineup. The Pope's at the top. Mostly you're taught that he's infallible, that he doesn't make mistakes, but we also know they do make mistakes because we know what some popes have done in history, whether it was money grabbing or having secret wives or whatever the hell they were doing. So, you take all this stuff in terms of how you feel and what you want to believe and what you think is right. But as you know, whenever a pope dies, the cardinals get together. They do this whole kind of mysterious thing where they go behind closed doors and they decide on a couple of candidates. And then they vote on those candidates. And then in Vatican City, if it comes out black smoke, it's still, they haven't picked a pope. If it comes out white smoke, they've picked a new pontiff. And they don't really ever talk about what really goes on. It's kind of secretive as to what really goes on when those cardinals get together to pick a pope. Other than we know they nominate different people and then they argue for them, as you probably have in other kinds of governments. So the governance structure is pretty rigid, and the roles for each priest, cardinals, and bishops are well spelled out. One of the things I didn't know is I have a friend from college at Williams who is an Episcopal minister, and he's called a canon. And I said to him, what the hell is a canon? And he says, well, actually, I'm the equivalent of a bishop. So in the Episcopal Church, canons are really bishops. So different name, but same kind of job and role. And he has an interesting church in New Hampshire. So all these things are interrelated. Catholics, as you know, have prayers for everything. There are morning prayers. There are prayers for meals. There are prayers for the day. There are prayers to keep near the presence of God. There's a daily examination at night you can do. There's an act of contrition you can do. And there are a lot of course, prayers as well in the Presbyterian Church. Catholics also hold Mary in a very special place because we believe she was the mother of Jesus. Marian women have had a role in the church since its very beginning. And even the Apostle Paul, when he was proselytizing about Jesus and moving around, between Rome and Greece and all over the place, he had women who assisted him. Now, women have never been allowed to be priests in the Catholic Church, but I think someday that's coming. But the importance of women in the church has been there since its very beginning. And Mary holds a very special role in the Catholic Church, especially like in countries like France. France is very Marian oriented. They think she's almost as important as Jesus himself. And they believe you can pray to Mary to get to Jesus. That if you have something and you want to go to Jesus with it, sometimes it would be better to go through Mary than for you to do it directly. So Mary's a source of place you can go to pray. It's a place to go for security. She's a person to pray to for family. She has a huge role in the Catholic Church. I'm not sure how many Protestants kind of understand that, but Mary is. And you will see like miraculous medals which say, "O Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee." And that medal and that statue of Mary with that kind of saying really means what it says, that you can go to her and she will protect you and help you in whatever trial and tribulation you're going through. Let's see. Sacraments. Oh, yeah, this is a biggie. So in the Catholic Church, we have like 7 sacraments, where the Presbyterians have 2. We believe first in baptism, that's a sacrament. Some people now call it the rite of Christian initiation. I mean, this is where you're really initiated into being a Christian, is through baptism. Then we have confirmation, where in the Catholic Church, you're told you're becoming a soldier of Christ. You have to go out into the world, proselytize about him, and be a warrior for him. It's got a military kind of connotation to it. Then, of course, there's Holy Eucharist. And then we have reconciliation or confession and penance. That's another sacrament. Then, if you're dying, we have the anointing of the sick, where you're given last rites. And then we have holy orders, which is where you become a priest. And we consider matrimony and marriage also as a sacrament. So we have all these different sacraments, and they're very important. And if you're a Catholic, girl or boy growing up, you need to have those sacraments throughout your life. And when you get to your last days, like I'll be getting to, I would hope to have the anointing of the sick before I pass away. There are complicated terms and concepts in the Catholic Church, like transubstantiation and other things that I'm not going to go into right now, because it's kind of pretty deep kind of religious discussion about the body and the blood, and being different people at different times and all kinds of stuff. So I'll let that go. And I want to get to the Presbyterians, because you guys are very, very interesting. And I'm now a Presbyterian, so it's kind of good to read through this. So Presbyterians really came out of the Reformation. It was one of the groups that when Martin Luther, who was a Catholic priest, put up his 96 Theses, on the church door, which were his complaints against the Catholic Church, many of which now the Catholic Church recognizes, like indulgences and paying to get your soul saved and all kinds of crazy things that had a lot to do with money and power and less to do with really having your soul saved. There's been a lot of talk between the Lutheran Church and the Catholic Church about trying to combine at some point. These talks have been going on since the early 1900s, now to the 2000s. There's one part of the Lutheran Church that's willing to merge with Catholicism, and there's another part of the Lutheran Church that says over our dead bodies. So there's been kind of a hang up on that. But really, it's almost like the Catholic Church saying, Luther, you can come home. You were right about a lot of things. We made a lot of mistakes, and we should be one church again. So I don't know how many of you know that, but those discussions have been going on for like 20 years. And they're serious about it. But they will lose some of the Lutherans who say, over my dead body will I become part of the Catholic Church. So that we'll see what happens. But anyway, Presbyterians came out of that whole Reformation movement. A lot of Presbyterians, it's believed, have had a lot of a major role in the way America developed. A lot of the founding fathers were Presbyterians. And one of the great things and hallmarks of your church is you guys believe in voting in elections, which we don't have in the Catholic Church. You don't vote for a bishop, you don't vote for a cardinal, you don't vote for a pope. But you guys do vote, and you have your sessions, and you have your synods, and you have different things, which I'll talk about in more detail, where votes are a big important thing. So it's almost like democracy in religion when it comes to the Presbyterian Church. It's the governance, it's much more open, much more debating, much more inclusive than I would say, the Catholic churches. On the other hand, as you well know, let me do a little bit of the history and then I'll get into the difference between the Presbyterian Church USA and the PSA. So they trace the roots of Presbyterianism actually to Scotland and somewhat to the writings of John Calvin. They also believe that the first Presbyterians that came to the United States settled on the East Coast. This was in the kind of 1630s that they traced the church back to. 1706, they have this particular date that different Presbyterian ministries formed the first Presbyterian church in America. So that's 1706. In 1717, the synod was comprised of other Presbyterian groups, and they all met in a synod in 1788 in Philadelphia. So the first synod in 1788 was held in Philadelphia, and they formed the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church, and they adopted their own constitution for the church. Now, as you know, you're called a confessional church. You adhere to the statement of faith and some of the creeds. You also believe in the Book of Order. There's different versions of your Bible, the Revised Standard Version, the RSV. There's the Pew Bible. There's a Good News Bible. Some people use the King James Bible. You have a Confession of Faith, and you also have the Heidelberg Catechism. In the First Great Awakening, which was around 1810, there was a major split in the Presbyterian Church over the issue of revivals. And part of the church decided they wanted ordained and educated ministers and be formally educated in the religion. And that became PCA. Then there were a number of Kentucky ministers who withdrew and formed the PCUSA. And it's the largest group among Presbyterians now. I went to a Presbyterian Church in America service about a year or so ago in Milburn, New Jersey. I happened to be there and I wanted to go to church. The Catholic church's hours that Sunday weren't very good. Anyway, this Presbyterian church had good hours, and I went, not knowing that the church was really PCUSA and PCA were very different churches. And so I went to this PCA church in Milburn, New Jersey, and it was certainly much more fundamental. The minister talked for 45 minutes. The service ran between an hour and a half and 2 hours. It was more fundamental, I would say. I talked to the minister afterward, and they didn't believe in abortion. They were against homosexuality and same-sex marriage. So very different, than our church. And I didn't realize there were these two different sects and they worship so differently. And in fact, I said to the minister afterward when I was talking with him that he should meet Don Lincoln, somebody on the other side. And he said, "Oh, I don't think Don Lincoln would want to talk to me." And so I came back and I went to Don and I said, I went to this church by accident and I found out they're a lot different than your church. And he goes, "Yes, that's true." And I said, "But I'd like to get you two guys together." And so Don said, "Yeah, I'll be willing to do that. I'd be willing to sit down and have a cup of coffee or lunch with the guy." So I called the guy back. He never responded. So I think he didn't really want to meet with Don, but Don was willing to meet with him. So I think that's kind of interesting. And it's just a personal story that I have between the two different branches of the church. And as you know, in your church government, you have an assembly of elders. which are called presbyters. Um, you have ruling elders. You certainly have ordained ministers. You have people who deal with building responsibilities, with finance responsibilities. You have deacons. And I am a deacon in the Presbyterian Church. Being a deacon in the Presbyterian Church is different than being a deacon in the Catholic Church. If you're a deacon in the Catholic Church, you can perform almost all the duties that a priest does, except communion and except confessions. As you know, in the Presbyterian Church, one of the things I love doing is doing extended communion in nursing homes and hospitals. So I go out on any given Sunday, this is when COVID's not around, and go to a nursing home and give those Presbyterians who want communion. And one of the things that's very different in the Catholic Church is, I said, every time there's a Mass, there's communion. So it can be literally daily. Whereas in the Presbyterian Church, it's usually once a month, like we do it once a month in our church. The funny thing is, when I do extended communion on that first Sunday, I may give communion to 6 different people, and I take communion with them. So I may receive communion in the Presbyterian Church on any given Sunday 5 or 6 times because I'm giving it to other Presbyterians. Whereas in the Catholic Church, you can only receive it once for every service. So it's different. It's kind of weird to me to get communion 6 times when I was used to only having it once. And deacons, you know, in the Protestant Church really go out into the community, really help people, do a lot of volunteer work. They do cooking, as you know, at different things at our church. The range of duties for deacons in our church, from flowers to all kinds of things, is enormous. Whereas deacons in the Catholic Church are really helping the priest perform his functions, except, as I say, they can't give communion, they can't do confessions. But it's interesting how different religions deal with deacons. But by and large, Presbyterians, certainly PCUSA, is more tolerant and inclusive. They ordain women, as you well know. We got Ann and we got Jenny. That doesn't happen in the Catholic Church, of course. You have sessions, you have elders, you have your congregations, and you have presbyteries for a larger geographic area. And then the ruling body of all is the General Assembly, which is the highest governing body of the church. You have a confessional tradition. Believers reaffirm faith and confessions like different creeds and other statements of faith. The Book of Confessions, which Presbyterians historically believe. Scripture is considered the primary teaching method for faith and life. You're a community of believers. You're not just a collection of individuals. Your confessions help guide and remind what Presbyterians believe in their sense of community. They have common values. So it's a wonderful church. I mean, I have to say, when I was joking around in my early days of becoming a Presbyterian, I used to call it Catholic Light, because you don't have mortal sins and you don't have to go to church on Sunday, which you're supposed to do in the Catholic Church. But I was very comfortable. I mean, the prayers are very similar. The readings are similar. The Psalms, the singing, I mean, it could really be Catholic Light. I mean, that's how I felt about it, and I still do. It's you know, I don't have to wake up on a Sunday and feel, God, if I don't go to church today, I've committed a mortal sin. Now I got to go to confession. You know, if I can't get up, don't get up. And as you know, in your church, Don will encourage you to go to journey class on Sunday instead of going to service. Well, that would never happen in the Catholic Church. You got to be at service. There's no way you're going to some Bible study instead of going to services. So there are those differences, and I welcomed them because the Catholic Church can be very overwhelming. And when it comes to getting divorced and getting remarried, the Catholics have a whole big to-do. You got to go before a tribunal. You got to argue why the marriage was never consummated. You got to argue. It's hard to do if you've been married 30 years and say the marriage was never consummated. Usually you have to pay about $2,000 to go through this tribunal process. They want both spouses or ex-spouses to show up, which can create more hurt and more division. So Catholics have a real problem about divorce, and you got to go through all kinds of hoops to get divorced, whereas, the Presbyterian Church, it's much easier to get divorced. So that's another big deal, difference. See, what else did I want to say? One good thing, too, I love about the Presbyterian Church is you're really encouraged to do lifelong learning. And that's why we do have the journey classes. That's why we have the men's and women's Bible studies. And we also believe you should get out and help people so you guys can rebuild homes and you'll do new water systems, down in Central America. I mean, that whole push in Presbyterianism to get out and to be an example to the world of God. I like calling it, there's a reason for it, so I won't get into it, going out and giving people the impression of who God is. I love that phrase, give them an impression of who I am. And Presbyterians really live that by all the different activities, all the different things that they do in the world. I think that going out and spreading the word, and not necessarily proselytizing like Mormons do, but going out and just trying to give people an impression of who Jesus Christ is, I think is really not only nice, but really important. And that's a great thing in this church, that we have so many activities, so many things that people can do to continue their learning and their growing and evolving with Jesus. Again, going back, I also like the fact you do a lot of voting. You have elections for things. You have the 2 sacraments, baptism and communion, whereas Catholics have 7. Predestination is a tough issue in the Protestant church, because if you're more of a Calvinist than a Lutheran or whatever, you can get into some really big debates and arguments over the whole question about predestination. Catholics don't believe in predestination. The thing I'd leave you on, and then I want to take your questions and your thoughts, your criticisms, whatever you want to say, is I think Christianity and Judaism is going to become under more and more attack as we move forward in history. I just see it in the news every day. I don't know if you saw, there were 3 Catholics recently killed by an Islamic terrorist in France. These murders and these killings of religious people don't seem to be slowing down. And it seems it's either Jews or it's Christians. And I'm not quite sure why it is, but I think both our religions are under attack to some degree. You have people like my daughter and other younger people who just don't believe in God. I mean, concept doesn't help them, fulfill them, and they just don't believe it. They're much more into science. That's why a lot of them are into the Green Deal and environment. For them, it's a natural kind of extension of your own personal beliefs. So anyway, I'm worried about our future, both our churches. I'm worried about our inability to reach a lot of young people today. And I think a lot of it's starting to be reflected in our politics, which we won't go into. But there are deep divisions in this country, and some of them are along a lot of different reasons, but certainly religion's also part of it. So with that, I'll close and then ask you to ask any questions or make any comments or criticisms. Don't be shy.
Nick, I'll chime in. Can you hear me?
Yes, John, I hear you very well.
Okay. One thing that I used to teach Protestant Reformation back at the University of Delaware for a few years anyway. And one thing I learned to appreciate about the Catholic teaching, which you touched on, of course, is the sacrament of, I believe it's the sacrament of penance and confession and absolution. And what Catholics have, which I don't think we exactly do in the Presbyterian Church, well, maybe we do, maybe I'm speaking too casually, is that the priest will absolutely insist upon contrition. And that's a big word in the Catholic teaching. You really and truly have to be not just sorry in an offhand way, but sorry to the point that you're not going to do that again if you get absolution. And I think of that from time to time when I hear well-meaning people, maybe in my community, maybe on the television, saying that this well-meaning person, forgives some terrible crime that's been committed, or maybe forgives the guards at Auschwitz, which I don't. But that's not up to us to forgive, unless this person has offended us in some way. That person has offended God for sure. And that person has to be really, truly contrite to the degree that I don't believe exists outside Catholicism. But
yeah, you make an extremely good point. One of the reasons they've not given up the idea of having you go to confession to a priest is they do want you to feel humble. They do want you to feel extremely contrite. They want you to really be sorry for what you did. And they feel that going through a priest and then, saying an act of contrition at the end of that confession is extremely important, because you're humbling yourself, you're admitting you're human, you're admitting you made a mistake, you want to be forgiven by God, and you're deeply asking God to forgive you.
yes,
Now, people like Bill Clinton caused a lot of trouble.
Good point.
Bill Clinton, felt you could go out and sin, and as long as you said, Jesus, forgive me, that was all you needed to do. And that created, made the whole idea of confession and repentance less meaningful, I think, than to the way Catholics look at it, where you really got to be sorry and not repeat it. I mean, one of the things you're saying is, I recognize I did wrong. I'm asking for penance, and I'm telling you I won't do it again. A lot of groups, some Baptists and whatever church, I know. Clinton, I actually did work for Clinton. Clinton says he was Baptist, but he certainly didn't behave like that. He had a whole different idea about it. It was like, yeah, we're going to sin 1,000 times and God will forgive us 1,000 times. And I don't think it's the right way to look at it, but that's certainly.
Okay. Thank you.
Nick, can I ask about the saints?
Yes.
Do Catholics believe that the saint has special powers on their own, or, put this respectfully, do they think that the saint is by reason of being a special friend of God, can in effect jump the line and go to God and ask for favors for their friend? How is the saint viewed by
That's a really good question, David, and it's a mixture of things. One, they've had to live somewhat of an exemplary life. So let's say something like we can all relate to, like Mother Teresa. There's been discussions about her being a saint in the Catholic Church. One of the things is that the saint not only has led an exemplary life and followed the teachings of Jesus, but they've also performed 2 miracles. So they've got to be able to, in fact, see that that person did 2 miracles in their lifetime besides leading an exemplary life. And it's a whole process how one becomes a saint. It takes years very often. But once they become a saint, you could pray to them. They can do bidding for you. either to the Virgin Mary or to Jesus. So I don't know if I'd say they jumped ahead of the line, but they're looked at as ideal examples and types to follow, and that they may have, let's say, put it this way, a special audience with Jesus and Mary because of their having led an exemplary life.
But do they actually perform the miracle, or are they?
Yes, they have to perform the miracle.
Okay, so it's
So
not,
like if somebody
it's not
came to,
conduit, they have their own ability to perform miracles,
right. So
demigods or something.
yeah, I don't know if call them demigods, but they're certainly special people. The idea is that, let's just say, let me give you an example. Somebody's got cancer that they're going to die of, and all the doctors agree they're going to die of it, and whatever. And this person comes in there and talks with this person who's going to die, and tries to get them ready for death and for the afterlife. Catholics do believe in an afterlife, by the way, if I didn't emphasize it. They do believe there's a heaven and a hell. But if that priest or nun or whoever that religious person is goes in there, and all of a sudden that person is spontaneously cured, that would be a miracle in the eyes of the Catholic Church. And the whole thing about sainthood is they have a board of people who review the records, what the miracles were, and doctors. I mean, they're medical doctors on that panel who will also say this was a spontaneous cure or a spontaneous miracle that there's no scientific or physical explanation for. And if the person was in prayer doing this, then it's considered that it was, an act of God, actually. And this person was a conduit for God to do that act of curing them. So I look at them more as conduits or pipelines to God than I would really say they're semi-gods or demigods.
Nick?
Yes.
I had a question about the reference you made to Catholics being in conversation with some Lutherans and so forth about potentially a merger there and there being some difficulties.
Yes.
I would think that one of those challenges would be the marriage of the clergy, possibly being an issue, though I understand, is it your understanding in the earlier years of the Catholic Church, priests were allowed to marry? And if so, do you think that might actually be the case again going forward someday?
Oh, I definitely think it's going to be the case going forward. And again, you may not know this, but if you're an Episcopal priest and you convert to Catholicism and you're married, you can be a Catholic priest. So the Catholic Church is slowly doing that, where they're taking like priests in the Episcopal Church who are married and allowing them to become Catholic priests and stay married.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. So yes, the church is moving towards the idea at some point priests will be able to be married, just as you have pastors who can be married.
Yeah.
The unfortunate part about the Catholic Church, and I'll tell you, this is one of my great frustrations, it moves extremely slowly.
Yes.
It goes at a snail's pace. It goes by them waiting to really feel like they're hearing the voice of God before they make a decision. And when you're dealing with a lot of different men, they can take a long time. So the problem with the Catholic Church, I think, it's one of its great weaknesses. It's reluctant to change. It's slow to change. It does it only when it actually has to do it. And one of the problems is they're not getting many young men now who are becoming priests.
Is that
You
right?
know, you look at the seminaries, whether in Philadelphia or in New York, and I went to one, they maybe have a class of 6 or 8 guys.
Really?
And not only is it only 6 or 8 guys, but some of those guys will be in their 50s and 60s who've already raised families, been married, maybe their wives died. They ran major companies, and they decide in their late years they want to be a priest.
Yes.
So in my class, I had 2 men, one who ran a major oil company, a major oil company, and another one who was a New York City cop and then detective, and their wives had died, and in their 50s and early 60s, they wanted to become Catholic priests. and they were part of that class of 6.
Wow.
So the church is taking in older men to become priests. We're also taking more priests from India and a lot of underdeveloped countries.
Mhm.
And because it's a necessity, they can't meet the needs of their people in terms of masses and services unless they got enough priests.
Yes.
So that's why I'm saying to you, necessity, is the greatest kind of father of creation. And at some point, women are going to be priests, and at someday priests will be married. But I
Mhm.
don't know when.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Any criticisms, any goof ups, any mistakes I made? You guys are better Presbyterians than I am.
Excellent talk, Nick. Just excellent.
Thank you, John. And you didn't need visuals.
Right.
All right. Well, my 10 o'clock bird clock is going off here, so it's 10. But I'm certainly willing to stay on if anybody has any other questions or comments. Otherwise, you're free to go. And if you haven't voted, go vote. Very important.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Gary. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Dan.
You have time for another question?
Absolutely.
Really an observation. I just read a few weeks ago where an editor of several years of Christianity Today magazine, which was founded by Billy Graham, I think, 40 years ago or so,
Yeah, I think you're right.
resigned. He was born and raised a Catholic, became a Protestant, and just recently gave up his editorialship of that paper to go back to the Catholic Church. And when they asked him why,
Well, wasn't Billy Graham then?
huh?
Wasn't Billy Graham?
Oh no, this was Mark Galley, I think. Was
Oh,
his name.
okay.
Mark Galley.
I got lost in there because
He had
Billy
been the-
died. His
He
son.
was a more recent editor of the paper.
Okay.
And just resigned this year. And when he was asked for a reason, one of the principal reasons was, he said, in the Catholic Church, there was not nearly so much arguing. There was an easier way to come to consensus and to have a greater spirit of unity. Christ prayed that his disciples would be one as he and the Father were one. And yet he said in that more evangelical kind of tradition he was in, there was so much fighting over, you mentioned abortion and other social issues and so forth. He said in the Catholic Church, agree or not, there's more of a sense of harmony and unity there, he felt. So I was rather surprised, that he did that. But I think it is true. And in so many Protestant settings, there tends to be a lot of arguing,
Right.
and in public, and it probably is not helpful to the overall unity that Christians would like to portray to the world, which may be one reason some young people today are turning away,
Yeah. Well, the Catholic Church does have a core of beliefs, and none of us really stray that far from it. And priests who are dedicated their lives to being priests or bishops, whatever they are, know what the core values are, know what the main teachings are, and do kind of coalesce around them. There is less disagreement. But on the other hand, Catholicism can be very rigid, and Catholicism can be hard to take at times. And I think a lot of young people aren't used to that kind of discipline, don't like that kind of discipline, rebel against that kind of discipline. And so as a result, we're losing our younger people, even though the church may be, more in unity and more agree with each other. I mean, look in your church. I'm not saying I think anything out of school, but you in the last several years had to deal with some difficult issues, which were, do we accept homosexuality? Do we allow the marriage of people who are homosexual? And you've dealt with these issues head on, and you've lost some people. Some people have left over that kind of thing. Same thing about the ordaining of women. So you guys tend to be more open and public about your disagreements than the Catholics are. Generally, if we have a really big disagreement, it's done behind closed doors
Yeah,
as opposed to publicly.
right.
And we would not allow for that kind of divergence where one sect of the Presbyterian Church says you can do this and the other side says you can't do this.
Yes,
It's one Catholic Church. We're hammered
Yeah.
with all the time.
yes.
So your point is well taken. But on the other hand, you have to ask yourself too, how closed-minded are they being?
Yeah.
Or how much does
Oh,
this
yeah.
slow them down making change?
I think of John Paul II several years ago making an apology to Galileo
Right,
350 years earlier. Sometimes it takes a long time to get an apology,
absolutely.
you know. You may
Yeah.
have the unity, but there's not the freedom to accept new truth and new understandings as we understand our world better.
Right. And let's go to another issue. Let's be political for a second. I think it was Pope Pius X. Anyway, I think there was that Pope during the Second World War, where, clearly the Catholic Church and the Pope were afraid that between Mussolini and Hitler, that if they didn't kind of toe the line, the church would be in serious, serious trouble.
Right.
And there was a play called The Deputy, which is about, Pope Pius X having to make decisions about what do I do about all these Jews being, exterminated in Germany? Am I going to say something publicly? Am I going to take a stance against it? And basically, he chose not to, certainly publicly. What he
Right.
might have done behind the scenes, who knows? But publicly, he certainly didn't take a stance about what he darn well knew was going on.
Yeah.
So that was certainly a time when the church not only was recalcitrant, but it was stupid. I mean, they knew what was going on. So
Right.
the church makes mistakes because it is still run by men, and even though the Pope likes to think he's infallible. So.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
the church going to be able to recover from the pedophilia scandals
Eventually,
eventually?
yeah, it's really hurt the church financially.
I mean, they probably don't have any more incidences than any other profession that deals with children, but by sweeping it under the rug for so long, they made it worse.
They
Just like
absolutely
Penn
did. And
State
I will,
made it
right.
worse.
And you know me, David, I'm an open book. I will tell you, when I was at the seminary getting my master's degree in religious studies, I got to talk to a lot of seminarians. And I used to say to them, what's the story here, guys? And what they used to tell me were there were a third of the guys were heterosexual, a third of the guys were homosexual, and a third of the guys were just neutral. They had no sex drives. And that's why they weren't interested in getting married. They just didn't have a sex drive. And then you had guys who liked other guys, and the seminary was a perfect place to go to have that kind of male companionship. And the problem really was priests covered for priests. Forgetting about whatever the hierarchy did, there were homosexual priests who would get together, do their thing, and it was a secret between them and that other priest. And they met other priests of that ilk.
No, that's okay.
And
About the problem.
that's the way it went. And unfortunately, some of those guys who were gay were predators. They were looking for younger boys. I had a brother, a Christian brother. He and his friend, a Christian brother, got thrown out of the Catholic Church because they were homosexuals. And they were able to find enough other homosexuals who had gotten thrown out of the church that they had their own church that followed the rules of Catholicism, except for that, and met, undercover. And because he had been a homosexual, I got to know him really well. He worked for me for about 10 years. I learned about what it's like to be homosexual in America, in their own bars, in their own restaurants, their own community, their own parts of different beaches in New York where they could congregate. I mean, they had a whole community unto themselves. And yet they were very good people. Some of them were still very religious. They still practiced Catholicism. and they practiced it more with a priest who would accept them. So we had these things going on for a long time, and it was kind of accepted. So they never really understood the dangers to having gay men attack young boys. They just didn't get it. And they covered it up. They move a priest around to hide it when they found one. And there were also priests who molested young girls that I know of. So, if you're going to have the panoply of people and men, you're going to get the panoply of different behaviors. But the church was way too slow dealing with it, and they hid it, and they kind of accepted it. Now, if you go back, and I know you'll appreciate this, David, this is why I'm saying this. You go back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome. One of the ways that young men learned in Greek society was to be adopted by a gay man who put his arm around them and then taught him everything he knew. So it was part of the educational system in Greece for young boys to be taught by older men. And it was part of the culture. And it was part of the Catholic culture for that to go on and nobody to say boo about it.
Nick,
Yes,
I
Fred.
have a question.
Sure.
I'm curious, does your former Catholicism inform the way you worship as a Protestant today? Do you sort of merge your two belief systems into a special form of Christianity that gives your own faith a kind of unique blend?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And yes, I'm proud to say with a smile on my face that I'm very happy between being in both camps. It fits well together. I don't have any problem or confusions about it. I love it. I take the best from both. I love the fact that I can bring communion to all these people in nursing homes or older people who are just locked in their homes. Forget about being in a nursing home. And serve them and be able to take communion each time and say the prayers with them. I mean, I just love it. And you can't do that in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And I think it's almost like, in that sense, I'm a priest, but as a Presbyterian, not as a Catholic. So, yeah, I love the blend. I'm very comfortable with it. I think it's much more accepting of human nature in the Presbyterian Church. I mean, some of the rules in Catholicism, particularly with matrimony, are very hard to live up to. And I think Presbyterians are more realistic and understanding of human nature sometimes in the Catholic Church. Ted, do you want to say anything?
No, I'm very interesting discussion and presentation, Nick.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Well, if you guys don't have any more questions, I'm going to run to vote.
Okay, sounds good. I guess that closes it down for today.
That closed it down today, but thanks everyone for listening and staying.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thanks.
Craig,
Yeah,
if you want to stay on, we can do a rehearsal of your presentation.
okay, sure.
Everybody else can end the session.